I want to thank everybody for joining us and discuss some of the most interesting topics we've come across. Thanks to you and our extended user base to find out what people are struggling with. And we're always finding topics where we think everybody would benefit from these answers. We shouldn't limit it to just the people asking that question. So that's what this is all about. Before I review the agenda, as always, with GoToWebinar, up in that toolbar, there's a panel for asking questions. We're monitoring that questions panel. Submit your questions at any time. We will answer them. The way this will probably work is we'll collect questions while reviewing the material, and at the end of each agenda item, we'll kind of open up the floor to questions. We'll answer them. And at the end, we'll do just a round table. We'll just open it up. You can ask about anything you want. It doesn't have to be about today's topics, which we should look at. So what are today's topics? Let me move this out of the way. So we're going to start with a look at Headless CMS variants. It is one of the unique properties of our Headless CMS that makes it so powerful and I think somewhat unique in the industry. A classic way to illustrate the value and power of variants is to talk about a multi-language experience. And Seb is going to show you what that means. How would you create a multi-language experience using the variants feature of Headless CMS? We'll then move on to talk about what we're calling relative movement. That's when multiple items are moving relative to each other. How would you architect that inside Intuiface using the animation capabilities? The principles of relative movement can be extrapolated, I think, to some really just overall creative use of animation. So we think it's a cool topic. We'll then move on to something called the in-app browser feature. My guess is the vast majority of you don't even know this feature exists. With Player Next Gen, it becomes fairly important that you become comfortable using this feature. So we're going to introduce you to it and help you understand why it's important and how you would use it. And then we'll return to the Headless CMS space to wrap up today's agenda by looking at the notion of base duplication, how to share bases with other accounts, let accounts make duplications of that base versus sharing the original. Particularly those of you on this call that have clients, you may want to be duplicating bases rather than sharing the original, but there are multiple reasons to do it. We'll talk about those and help you get to the bottom of duplication. So that's today's agenda. It's pretty meaty. A couple of the topics, we go fairly deep. As I said, keep sending those questions in. Between each agenda item, we'll answer some of the big ones, and at the end, Seb and I will just answer anything you've got in mind. I think that's it, Seb. Anything you want to add before we jump in?
No, except I'm not going to start with the CMS. I'm going to start with the relative movement, and then we keep the CMS for the end. But besides that, we agree on the agenda.
You've got the pen, you've got the screen. Enjoy yourself, Seb. Yep. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you. All right, let's get started. And we are indeed going to start with some animation. This is something I've seen recently in one of our customers' project, and I wanted to share that technique with you because I've been using it myself for quite a few years, but it may not be an obvious thing to think about. So before I go deeper into this, let's see the end result, right? So the animation we want to look at is something like this, and hopefully the screen share does it justice with my net bandwidth at the moment. But I'm just going to play it 2 or 3 times in a row. So you can imagine these circles here, the buttons going around this circle path, while the text are always pointing downwards. So the text is always visible to me and to you. But again, if I play this, we have these buttons going slowly around the edge of this brownish circle here. So how do we do that? I'm going to jump straight to edit mode and just explain how this works. What are the prints? So I have this existing layout here, which is the end result. I'm not going to use that. We're going to build a simplified version just from scratch, right? Before, let me just take a button here and move it to the center of our scene. All right. So let's say we want to have this button follow that path. In Intuiface, the only actions you have are move to, but that's linear, rotate, and scale. That's what you have. We don't have follow a path, an SVG path. That would be ideal, but we don't have that. Instead, what we can do though is to rotate objects, but we can also rotate objects that belongs to a collection, and we can rotate that collection. So now if I have these buttons here, and I do rotate this collection, you can see the buttons going around that circle. So let me show from the beginning. If I put a group here, let me put a square group, probably something a bit bigger. Let's go 1000, 1000 here, and then put our light button in that group. Okay. If I put the button in the center of the group and I rotate that group, it looks like I'm just rotating the button. Now, if I move the button to the side of the group, my center of rotation is still the center of the group. And I can rotate this button around that center of rotation, center of gravity. When I do this, you can see the text follows along, right? But that's what we use. That's why we use the counter rotation, because each element can be rotated individually. So I can counter rotate this button. All right, that's the idea of having different center of origins, one for the object itself, so you rotate it around itself, and one for the parent collection where you rotate the whole thing. So if I take this group here, and let's say I move it to 90 degrees. So my rotation for the parent is 90 degrees. If I want my text to look downwards, I need to rotate it for minus 90 degrees. Simple enough. If I take the example of 45 degrees, I need this button to be rotated by minus 45 degrees. It's just the opposite. If I move the parent from X degrees, I need to move the child from minus X degrees. We can do that with a binding. So if I just move this around so you see the result, I'm going to bind the rotation of my child element, the button itself, to its parent group, which is not this one. It should be buttons group orientation. So now we have if 45 then 45, so it doubles the orientation. We don't want that. We want minus. So we want to add a converter and multiply this parent angle by -1. -1. Come on. So if I now rotate my group, look how the light button is always facing downwards, whatever the angle I go with. That's the trick. So I'm going to just add the bindings here on this one. Rotation, put the converter, multiply -1. And now if I animate this group, you can see all my buttons are following the path because the group is centered with the ellipse. And I get this nice smooth animation. So on the button, you can now animate the group with an easing path so it slows down at the end. And if you want 3 different speeds, you just split that group into 3 groups, which is what we have here. So if we look at the end result, we have our group for button number 1. So we animate this one first, then we animate the second one. And so we kind of have a delay between these 3 animations and having the 3 objects that go one after the other. That's about it for the animation and this notion of relative movement. It's about rotating an object, a child object within its parent to change its center of gravity, center of rotation in that case. You can do that with a move as well. So you can move an object like a group and then counter move a sub element, a child element, to create some relative animations. Jeff, that's about it for this one. That's all I had. I'm going to go back into play mode and show the end result again. Can you tell me if we have any questions about this particular element? And I did mess up with my group, so of course the animation is completely offset right now.
No questions to the group, but I have a couple questions. By the way, this project, what you're showing, is actually coming from a customer project, right? So it's inspired by, I guess I should say. But
it is inspired by,
I
just reduced the buttons, so we have nice looking buttons, no names.
Yeah, no, but it's inspired by an actual project. A couple of questions or comments / questions. So about binding, I don't know how many people on the call are familiar with binding at all. This might have been the first time they've seen it, this ability to mirror the value of a property in another property. You did rotation to rotation, but to confirm, it doesn't have to be the same property that you're binding to. Any property can bind to any property, technically, right?
Yeah, correct. So, for instance, let's take a very, very silly example. What can I think of? Let's go with an additional button here, no binding. I'm just going to put it smaller. I could bind the X value of this button to the rotation of our first button. Now, that's going to look weird, probably. But then what I could do is, I know my rotation goes somewhere between 0 and 360. So between 0 and 360, and I want to go between 200 and 800 or 1800. I have no idea what this is going to look like, but basically I'm transforming a rotational movement into a linear movement. Let me reset that. So you see my light button here at the bottom went from the middle to the right. If I reset the animation and show it again, because I'm transforming this rotation X degrees to Y degrees into a translation. Translate.
Yeah, that's that's what's really cool, is it doesn't have to be like to like. You can get very creative, and the linear converter is a pretty cool. It's a pretty cool binding converter because it enables you to translate one set of values to another set. It's sort of mapping, like Celsius to Fahrenheit, right? That would be a linear converter of mapping Celsius to Fahrenheit, but it could be anything like this here, which is rotational angle is mapped to a range of x-axis values. That's what you saw here. And so this notion of relative movement can involve anything. It's not just rotation angle.
So it's funny because actually, if you go into our article, the first sample we have for the linear converter is the Celsius to Fahrenheit. Thank you for imperial units to exist. This one is a nightmare for me, Pila. And you can also easily create a parallax with this kind of linear converter. So when I move an object from A to B, I want to move another object from A plus to B plus, but with a different speed or a different scale. But now we are transforming an X to an X, so it's still two move to actions, but you could transform a rotation to a move to action with this kind of converter.
That's right. And I mean, somebody on the call asked, so binding is about movement. Well, it doesn't have to be about movement. Binding is about taking the value of one property and putting it in another property. Maybe the result is movement, but it actually could be anything. If you're using interface assets to communicate with the cloud, you're using binding to get that information from the cloud. It has nothing to do with movement, but it's the exact same principle. You're binding, and in the case I just gave you, the source property is in the cloud. In this case, was said the source property is another object in the scene. Both of them involve binding. It's a really powerful feature. It does not have to be about movement. It just happens to be here. Any property can bind to any property. Go ahead.
Right, and when you're designing these kind of things, a good thing to do too, especially when you're doing it for the first time, is to help debug or troubleshoot what you're trying to do. So I like to add a text asset, bind the text property to whatever value I'm playing with. So in that case, we're looking at the light group and its orientation. And right now, I know I messed it up. So this should be 180 by default, I guess. And the medium should be 180 as well. So now when I hit play, and I'm going to move this 180 to 0 or 360, I can see, I should see, there we go, the numbers going from 180 to 360. So I can follow exactly what's going on. The binding is making this data flow happen. So the data changes in an input and goes to an output. In the case of our button rotation, in between, we add a converter to reverse that value with the multiply -1, or with the button at the bottom here, we add a linear converter to do some more math. But that's about it. It's bringing the values from a source to a destination.
Very smart. There's a couple other questions. Let's move on in the agenda, Seb. We can always get back to it, right? So why don't we transition?
Yep. Sure. All right, so let me stick to play mode, go to the next one, the in-app browser. So first of all, why? Why do we need that thing? What is it? So without going too much into the details, today we have two main technologies for our players, player for Windows, player for the rest of the world. Soon player next gen to be released in October, but still our existing player for Android iPad has the same principles. It's relying on a web technology. In the web, you have something which is called CORS, cross-origin resource sharing, which in a nutshell prevents you from stealing a website from somebody else and putting it into your own website, in a nutshell. So when you have a web app, if you try to display a web page which does not belong to you, as in it's a cross-origin, so it belongs to another server, usually you are not allowed to do that. How do we go around that limitation? We use a feature which is called the in-app browser. The example I like to take is when you're on your phone, whether it's an iPhone or an Android phone, you're in your mail app, you have an email with a link. When you click on that link, usually it does not open your browser as a separate window. It opens like a full screen pop-up within your email that displays the web page full screen. It's in the app. In your email app, you have an embedded browser that will display that web page, but it cannot display the web page within the email itself. It's not allowed to do it. Same idea. So we have a full Help Center article here that explains how to do that. And so why do you need it? If you're running Intuiface on a platform other than Windows, iPad, Android, BrightSign, and you need to display a website on which you don't have access to these CORS settings, and 99% of the time you will not be able to change that, you can use this feature, or I should say you have to use this feature to display a web page. So as of today, we support it on Android, BrightSign, and iOS, iPads. And the way it works is you're not using the web browser asset anymore. Instead, you're using a call URL action, which is available at the overall experience level in the scene structure. And here you have to type in a special function, if you will. It looks like this. You are calling the in-app browser. You want to do an open, and that's the link, for example, CNN.com. That's the website you're trying to open in here. So if we look into Composer, I have this button here. Right now I'm on Windows. So if I press that button, basically it does nothing. So let me bring in the first time I'm trying to do that. So bear with me. Unlock, unlock. All right, that's my phone. Android phone here, running player next gen. I'm going to launch this Q&A Android web app where I have a few buttons. So the one at the top is going to try to open a web browser asset, the traditional one, with Intuiface.com. That's the website I'm using. If I try to do that, even our website does not allow a random web app to display it. That would be stealing our content. So I cannot do that. The first big button here is actually using this line here. In-app browser, open, Intuiface.com, nothing else. If I click on that, I'm getting a kind of a title bar, navigation bar, so like a browser, but it's not Chrome, it's not Edge, it's not Safari. and I can browse my web page. I always have a close button, so I can go back to the player, and I can go to something else. This in-app browser has options, like a lot of them. Some of them are for all the platform, some of them are Android only, some of them are iOS only. This is all in the article I was showing just a minute ago. For example, I can remove the toolbar, so I cannot allow anybody to go to somewhere else. They just have the back and previous and next buttons and still the close button. I can also change the color bar, at least on Android. So it looks a little bit more integrated depending on what website you are using. And these are the two lines you can see here where you basically add the parameters after the URL you're trying to open. So in a nutshell, the in-app browser is almost replacing the web browser asset when you are running on a non-Windows platform using a web-based player. And it works on Android, iOS, and Brightside. There is one alternative to that, depending on what web content you want to use, and that's the HTML frame asset. For example, in YouTube, when you do a share, you can get an embed code, which is like, a little bit piece of HTML, tag, iframe, source equals something. You can use this code and put it in an HTML frame, but a lot of websites will not have this embedding feature like YouTube has. So it really depends on what you want to display in this web browser or what your customer has to offer to display in this web browser. That's the in-app browser in 3 minutes, 5 minutes maybe. Jeff, do we have any questions about that, or do you have any comments?
Not yet, but as always, I have a couple, and also for clarification. I think the most important point to stress is, as far as we know, as far as I know, the restriction on CORS is the default for a website. That
Right.
Most websites probably prevent it, which
Yes.
means that most websites will not run in the web browser asset in Player Next Gen, and maybe even some players of Gen, I guess, but in Player Next Gen. So this is not about the exception. This might be about the rule. This is a big deal.
Correct.
Most websites will not work in the web browser asset in Player Next Gen, because Player Next Gen is essentially it's a web engine. I'm oversimplifying, but to the website, it looks like it's being embedded in a domain. To the third-party website, and it says, no, you can't do that. You cannot embed me in a domain. So the workaround is what Seb showed you. Seb, it's always full screen, right? That's the point. That's maybe the
correct.
biggest restriction. The biggest restriction versus, well, there's a couple restrictions. Let's be clear about it, Seb. The first is InAppBrowser is full screen, right? You can't kind of put it in a box. It's full screen.
I don't think you can. You can change some buttons position. You can allow zoom or not. You have full screen, yes or no. But I believe if you put full screen, you just hide the status bar. A few, details. But no, you cannot put it in a box on top of your experience in half the screen, as far as I know.
Yeah. And also, you lose things like link is clicked. We don't have visibility inside it the way we do the web browser asset.
Black box.
So unfortunately, it's more of a black box, right? Essentially.
Yep.
So that, I mean, it is. So it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and also to clarify one thing, this is not an interface restriction, right? This is not just interface. It's for the whole web world. Any web app cannot display a web browser if the cores of this website are saying, nope, I don't want to share my resources with you because you're not my origin. It's a cross-origin resource sharing, and I'm saying no to you.
Yeah.
This
is not a Player Next Gen issue. This is any web app issue. We happen to be a web app with Player Next Gen, so there you go. So we didn't do anything wrong. It's just the nature of the web. From a security perspective, the default is to prohibit this sort of embedding, this cross-origin resource sharing, and there you go. It is what it is. Can you, Ahmed was asking, can you just show once again where the call URL is in Composer? How do you
Sure.
pull that up?
Yeah. It's we've had it for quite a few years, but before Player Next-Gen, we didn't use it that much. With Next-Gen, obviously, we're going to use it quite more. So when you add a trigger, any kind of trigger, doesn't matter. I'm using a button is released here. Let me do a blank one so you see the full process. You want to go in your scene structure. You want to go on your experience itself. So not the scene, not the layer, the experience, the root of your structure, overall experience, and then call URL. And this is where you need to use that syntax, which is in-app with a French keyboard, in-app browser, colon / open, and then your URL. So https wcnn.com, for example. You can see it appear full length here at the top. So that's why I go to the website, to the help center, and just copy and paste the line because I never remember if it's uppercase, lowercase, what's the exact syntax. So I would just type in calls here because I know the cross origin is the issue here, and I get to the article and I can see how it works, and I copy this line and just replace the URL with
And
my
if you
website.
scroll down, can you show some of the flags?
Yeah, so we have example here, presentation style. I think this is more for iPads. Close button caption, close button color. So you can change the, you can add some text on the close button, at least on iOS maybe. You can change some colors. So it really depends on, this is for all platforms. And then we have some Android only options and then some iPad only options. I would think BrightSign only has these ones, the common ones.
Thank you, Seb. So it's a big deal. It's just something, I mean, I would anticipate that probably long-term, we integrate InAppBrowser more explicitly so you don't have to do this funky thing with call URL. So probably at some point, it might even just be something you drag in from the assets toolbar. But currently, this is how you do it, okay?
Yeah, and just so you know, this InAppBrowser, this is not an Intuiface wording. This is what exists today on the operating system of iOS or Android. So any app where you try to open a URL, it will open an in-app browser. It's like if you click on the link from your email because you got a GoToWebinar invite, you will have a GTM :/ something which will open the app. These are called URI schemes, if I remember well. So it's kind of a standard.
Thank you, Seb. We can move on. Thank you.
All right, our two FCMS topics. So when we discussed that with Jeff, just tell me, are you sure we didn't talk about multi-language in a Q&A already? I said, yeah, I checked, we didn't. We talked about it in our last user conference. So I don't have 20 minutes here or 40 minutes. So this is more like a reminder of not that the HCMS can be used for multi-language, but more about if you have an experience and you need multi-language in your experience, you should use the HCMS. Even if it's a simple use case. If you have 5 words or 3 images, that doesn't matter. It will make your life much easier than having what I see way too often, one scene for English, one scene for French, one scene for Spanish. Oh, we have only 3 scenes. That will be only 9 scenes. But then when you have one change to make, you have to make it 3 times. Inconsistency leads to error, leads to end customer having a bad experience. So even if it's a very simple use case, a couple of text, I would suggest going with an HCMS base. So let me open this one to show a structure here. General information, super simple. We have one logo, we have one title. The logo doesn't change with the language, the title does. So on our title, we do have our variant language. Just as a reminder, language is not an off-the-shelf variant. You have to create it yourself. It doesn't have to be language. It can be whatever you want. I think I saw the question earlier in the chat. You can use variants for anything that will make your content change on some kind of context. Could be language, could be your location, could be the device name. Is it a portrait kiosk, a landscape kiosk, to change which image I want to use? Whatever you want. Whatever condition should change the end result, what is shown to the end user on the screen. Multi-language happens to be a common scenario. So we have a variant here, we have the language, we assign the language variant, and if we look into here, we have 2 languages set at the moment. You can add as many as you want. Then in the content side, the logo is set once and for all, and then we have our drop-down. English has one text, and then French has another one. Now, in Composer, what does it look like? We have our general info, title and logo. Actually, I'm just going to delete these ones to show you how simple that is. Drag and drop. And right now, if I select my base and I switch from English to French, my text switched to French. I have nothing to do. So let me just make it a bit more readable. All right. So how do you enable the user to pick which language he wants to use? In Composer, you can see I can switch this property, this variant, from one variation to another, English to French, French to English. We have actions for that. So when you create your buttons, you can call the action on your base, set variant, set language. Why do I see language here? Because that's the name of my variant. If you had 2, 3 variants, you would see 2 or 3 actions in this list. This is all dynamic, based on what you decide you want to use in your base. The values you see here are dynamic as well, based on the variations you make available in this particular variant. So if I press the French button, I want to set my language to French. Same thing for English. It is super simple to use, and then, in my opinion, very simple for non-Composer users. Go in the cloud, in the CMS, and fill in the content, proofread the text, approve the translation. It really makes the life much easier for maintaining something which might be simple at the beginning, but then after months or years of existence, the project grows, and believe me, it can get messy. I've seen some ugly structures in some experiences. We have this tool for multi-language, for any content that can vary based on the condition. That's why I'd like to see more people use it. Now, if we go into this collection, same deal, right? It's you can use in collections the multi-language as well. So let's say we have a list of images that can be products, that can be artifacts, that can be items in the museums, I don't know, with a title, maybe a description, whatever that needs translation. If you had the text in the image, you could set the image with a variant as well. So the image would change based on which flag you select. I've seen that as well with some, nicely designed buttons where the text was embedded in the buttons. It's totally doable. If we look at our structure, the artwork is this time a collection, not a group. Each item is defined by an illustration, which doesn't change with the language in this example, and with a title, which does change, hence the green dot here. So we have selected language. And then same ID in our list, we have the text for English, we have the text for French, and they change on the fly. You don't have to do any conditions. You don't have to manually target every single text in your scene. If I switch here from French to English, this text changes, all this text change at the same time. It's instant. I don't have much more to say besides use it. Really. Jeff, do we get any questions on that example?
No, but as always, I want to emphasize a couple things and ask a question. But could you Could you give another example just verbally of how one might use variants? I think we've done something involving menus. I don't know if that's a good example to help people just see it used in a different context.
Yeah, that can be one. So if you have lunch menus, dinner menus, and basically you have items with the same structure, but the items are different themselves, you can use variants for that. We have this example here, which is about location. That's actually the one we used in the user conference a year or something ago, where we have defined some locations. So default, Boston, Chicago, and then on each content, the full playlist of media files changes. So instead of changing just one field, like a text or an image, you can assign the whole collection with a variant. Meaning, if I go into the content and look into this media playlist, by default, you get nothing. If you are in Boston, you get the nice animals. Don't know if you can see that. I zoom like this. Now it's gonna little African wildlife pictures. And then if I look into Chicago, we're getting 3 images this time with the vintage car. So completely different content, but same structure depending on the location. We do have an article explaining how to use this location based on player tags, for example.
Yeah, and any type of media can be part of a variant. It doesn't have to be text with the language example. It could be anything. And again, what's nice is from the Headless CMS user's perspective, they're managing one table, not multiple tables. And so they're only changing the fields that vary. And the fields that don't vary, they're static. They're not reproducing that for each possible variant. It makes life a lot easier for the user of the Headless CMS. From the composer perspective, I guess calling a variant versus opening a different table, maybe it's not that hard, but it's way more intuitive for the user of the Headless CMS itself. And then the beauty of Composer is you just change the variant value and it even updates in edit mode. It's really cool. You know exactly what's, if it's properly wired. You can see it happen right away. And remember, because the Headless CMS creates a locally cached version of the base, your experience running in Player, running on the web, it's not talking to the base that's in the cloud. It's talking to a local synchronized copy. What that means is even if you lose network connection, network connectivity, you can still use the variants. You can still play with them because it's operating off a local copy, which is really important. Right, so
that's completely correct. So a pros of this solution is that all the content is downloaded offline locally on the device. So all the translation, all the variations are available locally. So if you have a trade show with multi-language example, it will work offline on a trade show once you have downloaded everything. The downside of it is that it does download everything. So I have a customer in mind at the moment who has an experience that will be deployed in 5 countries, meaning if to use the variants, he would download all the content of all the countries on all devices. Some people, not a problem. For them, they have gigabytes of videos running on smaller devices. So it could become a problem at some point. So in their case, it is more optimized. I would not say beneficial because it's more work, but it's more optimized to duplicate the bases and have one base per device, one base per country, which is almost a good transition for the next topic.
What a great segue, exactly. Why don't you head over to duplication? Yes.
All right. Let's move on to the new feature which we have released a couple of weeks ago, Headless CMS duplicate a base. And to clarify that, when you go on a base here on the dashboard, as the owner of the base, you were already able to duplicate a structure or duplicate the structure and content. You've been able to do that for a few months already, if not more. What is new is you can do it from within Composer when you make a copy of an experience that is using a base. So I'm going to take an example here with one of the samples from our marketplace. all our marketplace experiences are flagged as you can copy them. When you build your own, you can and you add. You can, if you allow users to be able to copy or not. It's documented in our Help Center how to do that. So the idea here for us was really to make our samples from the marketplace even easier to reuse than what they were so far, and have more samples using the Headless CMS base that we can share with you all. So you can use the XP, make a copy of the base automatically, and basically change all the content of that experience. So I'm using the guided selling here, coffee theme again. It has some questions. You answer 3 questions to tell you which coffee you should buy. This is using an Headless CMS base from the marketplace account. And that's about it. You don't need to know more about that. What is new is when I do a save as, I'm going to call this live Q&A. Okay. I'm getting this question. I have 2 choices. Do I want to use the current base, which I do not own as money@intuiface.com? I cannot make any changes in that content. If you just want to, change a few titles, put logo to a prospect, do it. You can still do that. But if you want to update all and make your own deal, or even make it a real project, I'm going to duplicate. In progress, little progress bar. It says _duplicate, so that's the new name. And now if I go into here, I right click, open base in HTMS. Now I have a full copy of the base with me as the owner. So the owner is not marketplace. This is not shared with marketplace. I have access to the structure. I have access to the content. Now, all this content, these are 3 collections. So I can use content import export to generate a CSV template. I'm just going to show you one here for the list of products. So if I get this Excel file on the right screen, that's my template. I can just fill in this CSV, upload it, and get a fully new experience. I'm looking at the clock. I had prepared some CSV. I don't know if I will go through them. So maybe I will while we're going through some questions. But in the end, the real idea is that you make your own version of this marketplace experience while keeping the usage of a Headless CMS base that we have built for you. That works for all the samples in the marketplace. That can work for all your experiences. If you build a template experience that you want to sell to client A and client B and client C, when you own your base and you do a save as, which I'm doing here as a second copy, you will be asked same question. Do you want to reuse the same base because you have maybe 2 versions of the same app for the same customer, same base? Or do you want to duplicate because you're creating a full copy of the XP with a full copy of the base for a new customer, if you're an agency, for example? That's a really powerful feature, in my opinion, and makes things way more reusable and a good time to invest to build these bases and use them as much as you can.
It was inspired by our need to make it easier for you to create your own copies of marketplace experiences. I mean, that was the initial use case, but it is not limited to that. If you own a base, if you're the base owner, and you give anybody else duplication rights, it's dashboard rights, right, Seb? I think it's dashboard rights.
Right. At the moment,
any
yes.
Other Intuiface account. For any other Intuiface account that you grant dashboard rights to, if they do a save as of your experience, they're going to get the pop-up that says, would you like to make your own copy of that base? So that's how the permissions are granted. And without this feature, you could not, people could duplicate a base, but it would be disconnected from the experience. You'd have to rewire it to the actual experience in Composer. This is preserving the wiring, the connections. In a way, the binding that we talked about earlier, it preserves that binding, but it uses a copy of the base in your own account, not binding to the original base in somebody else's account. So it's pretty important. And certainly if you have customers, clients, well, it could be internal or external, decent chance you'll be using this feature, let alone maybe just in the edit phase. So you're showing an import, okay. I mean, so imports existed for a while. Go ahead.
I'm actually editing this copy I just built because I had prepared some CSV and PNG. So that coffee guide experience, which came from the marketplace, I'm just changing it into something completely different, but using the same logic. I will have one more table to import, and I can run that demo example.
This way, what you're doing is you're treating the base as a template, that the content is not the point, that the structure is the point, but you still maintain the bindings, right, Seb, to the design in Composer.
I am not going to touch anything in Composer except maybe an image background and removing some coffee stuff because this is not about coffee anymore.
But if you change some text or something. All the connections between the user interface and the base are maintained. What Seb is doing is just changing the content inside that base. The bindings are untouched. They continue to exist.
And so I see one question about Excel. So yes, basically what I'm using here are CSV files. And I can show you the CSV which I'm using here for my import, but what I showed earlier where you can export that template, this one here, you just open it in Excel, and if you have your existing Excel files, I would suggest copying your content from your own Excel file into this CSV. So you just have to do a save and upload this template as a proper CSV formatted file. All right, so I published everything here. I just need to publish my content. Go in here. I maybe need to use something like this. I don't want any coffee stuff. And questions. I don't want any coffee stuff here. And this one should also use this background. And okay, maybe this text should be white. All right, that's all I'm gonna do. Now, instead of picking, do you like strong, medium coffee? If you guys have never heard of that sport/game, I know Jeff is laughing because I've talked to him about it quite a few. This is called disc golf, like frisbee golf. It's like golf, but with frisbees. And you don't have one frisbee, you have a ton of them. And it can be a nightmare as a beginner player to pick one. So how long have you been playing disc golf? Jeff, I guess less than a year, because I know you tried. What disc are you looking for today? A putter, a mid-range, fairway. So same like your golf clubs, you have different discs. What do you want? Usually people want to go far when they start because that's more fun.
Absolutely.
So let's go with a fairway. And when you start, everything wants to go left. So usually you want something that goes right, so it compensates a little bit. And the Innova Leopard is probably the disc you want to start with, which is the one you'll find out at Walmart for nothing. So I just changed a coffee guided experience into a disc golf disc suggestion by uploading 3 CSV files. I didn't touch anything in Composer besides removing a couple of images, and that's it.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, you created a completely different sales pitch just by updating the CMS, which could be done by people that have never seen Composer in their life, right? You don't have to know anything about Composer or anything about experiences to update the CMS. And Seb has created a completely different experience, pitching a completely different topic in 2 minutes. Of course, the CFPs already existed, the media already existed, but the actual work in Intuiface was super fast. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So to show the example maybe earlier, for example, when we go in here, we have this list of 3 questions. So all I did was go into questions, this one, on Excel, and fill in the blanks. So these are my 3 questions. These are my 3 answers. I put some icons in here, and that's it. And I uploaded that file and these images. And same thing for the products.
That's super
so
cool.
By the way, for this particular experience, one important thing is the way our experiences in Marketplace work can be more or less simple or more or less complex, depending on the samples themselves. But all of them have an Help Center article explaining how they were built and what does this structure mean. What is question ID? Why do I have 3 answers? So we explain how to modify these files to make sure that you know what you're doing.
And a cool side note, I'm not sure you mentioned this, that experience runs on the web using Player Next Gen. That's not necessarily, you have to be running it in Player on Windows or something. That's web enabled. You could be running in a browser.
Right.
I'm going to open up the floor to questions, Seb. So if anybody has questions about anything, this is the time to ask. Doesn't have to be about the topics we reviewed. There was one question from Ahmed about duplicating the base by default. I'm not sure I completely understand the question.
I do.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll take it. So if you as a user, you share an experience with somebody and they have 0 rights on the base, let me show you in here, actually, this base, which I just used, you can see I have users and permissions because it's my base. And the only other thing that has access to that base is this particular experience here because I just created it in Composer. So if I share this experience with you and give you nothing here, you will not be able to duplicate the base. I need to add you, I will not put your email address here, and today give you dashboard permissions for the time you make that copy. Eventually we'll have a right copy base. We'll add an additional permission here, something more refined. As of today, you need to give them the dashboard permissions. For our samples in the marketplace, we have a special hidden field which makes all our samples copyable. Can you say that? Is that a word? Copyable? Yeah. All our samples base can be copied. But you as a user, you do have to explicitly give permission to somebody else to make that copy.
Copyrific. No, that's not a word. Great. So again, we're opening the floor up to questions. If you have any questions about anything, please let us know. While you're thinking, we said this in the last newsletter, but just to remind you that Player Next Gen is due to ship generally available, no longer beta, no longer you have to ask for it, web deployment, the whole deal in about a month. Let's say October, it could be a little later, but we'll say early fall, mid-fall. So we're coming close. If you don't have Player Next Gen, you want to try web deployments, for example, just ask for it, you're going to get it. So anybody can get it, but you got to ask for it. It's not something that you can get on your own. When it's generally available, it's generally available. Anybody can get their hands on it. One other thing I'd share is that, and I have a slide for it. I guess it's not really that important, I guess. But in December, Seb and a colleague of ours, Kurt Haller, the GM of sales for Intuiface, will both be in Las Vegas for Digital Signage Experience for the DSE event, which is December 2nd to 5th, although I believe the Expo Hall is December 4th to 5th. Actually, why don't I share my screen? Give me a second. I'll show you the slide for that. I'll make myself presenter so you can see, show my screen. Okay, so hopefully you see my screen. And we will not have a booth. We decided not to have a booth this year, but Seb will be there with Kurt Haller, at least for the expo, which is the 4th to the 5th. The event is longer than that. It actually coexists with another event, LDI. I forget what that stands for, lighting and design. I don't know. It's an event-themed show. So basically, Digital Signage Experience and another event-themed show are combined onto a single floor. So you actually get to see a lot of cool stuff, not just about the world of signage. Seb and Kurt will be there, and they'd love to meet with you. So if you have any intentions of going, or maybe you're thinking of going, let us know and we can arrange to have you meet up with them. We've got a bunch of partners running our stuff over there, a bunch of partners we're meeting with, and so they'll be around. Seb, I'm not seeing any other questions. I don't know if you have something else to add, but I'm not going to make people wait if they're satisfied.
No, I just wanted to say thank you all for being here. I hope you learned a few things. One thing maybe we can add, and Jeff, this is probably going to be in the newsletter sometime between now and the next session, is so far we've been the ones coming up with these questions or topics we want to discuss, and we'd love you to ask us what is the next topic you'd like to be covered in this live Q&A. Obviously, you can still ask questions during the session, but help us make the agenda. Tell us what you want to learn about. Especially with next gen coming out, you may have questions about the web, about web triggers, multi-experience communication, things like that. We have some ideas, but still, we'd love to hear from you as well.
That exactly right. Well, you're going to help us make the agenda, and of course, it's once every 3 months. You don't have to wait 3 months to have a question answered. If you need a question answered, we'll do it right away. But the advantage of helping us build our agendas, we get a really good deep dive on it. And give you some really good guidance on how to work with it. So if you have a topic in mind, or maybe you know it, but you think other people would like to learn about it, let us know. We will make a more formal request for agenda items in the coming couple of months. What is September? So the next Q&A would be in December at some point. Be a nice little Christmas present, Hanukkah present, Kwanzaa present. No other questions. No other questions. So I want to thank everyone as well for joining us. Hopefully you found this valuable. We did record it. We will post it to our website and email you all a link to it. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the hard work. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. From the far north of Minnesota today, thank you for being here again. See you next time from the far south of Texas.
Where's Seb? That'll be a game too. Where's Seb? Thanks everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.